right? You care about education, obviously literacy fits in there. You care about better health outcomes, well, gee, what do you know? Better literacy skills actually ends up with better health outcomes. People become more aware of what's good for them or what they should be doing or what's good practices, right? You know, you're concerned about climate change. You know, wow, people become much more engaged when you have higher literacy skills, right? You're worried about productivity. Here's something that will actually help you improve that front. You're worried about poverty. Right? You want to get people out of the poverty trap, you know, give them the skills set so that they can actually, you know, fare better in our economy. And that's what all of this is about. So I'm going to end there because I've gone on and on and on for a long time.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. We've had, a number of speakers come up, but you're the first, I think, from the private sector, so bless your heart. Thank you very much. You spoke a little bit, we're going to have a Q&A now. I think we have about 20 minutes, and the floor will be open for questions. So if you do have questions, there's a mic over there and a mic over there, and we'll have time for a few of them. But I wanted to start off by asking you, you mentioned that literacy should be very, very important to the private sector, and I wanted to know a little bit more about what kind of roles, or what are the ways that you think that the private sector could be important in this initiative and could partner with some of the programs.
Sure. So let's be honest. I don't actually think the private sector should do this because it's being altruistic. Now, that's one of the core messages here is that, be self-interested and do this, right? Because if private sector companies can actually understand and get a better awareness of this, right, that they can then translate it into how it'll impact their bottom line. You'll notice that in that slide of all the things that literacy does, it was all about how to improve business performance and have a better outcome. So, I think, first of all, if we could increase business awareness and get a buy-in from more of the private sector, I think they actually would be more inclined to do, to champion the issue. To be honest, when it comes to things like skills training, in most businesses that, when I talk to, I speak to small business owners and medium-sized business owners and large corporations from coast to coast. And when you talk about skills training, they have no problem sending somebody to learn how to use a new piece of software, right? Like if it's really technical, specific skills training, they actually can sort of understand why the employee needs it. But the minute you go to generalized skills, something as basic as literacy, they actually have a harder time getting their head around the payoff to the business, and they're not as inclined to be willing to pay for that training. So I think, when we look at businesses, many of them actually have a budget for skills training. And I think that if you actually looked at your workers, you may actually find that some of them are running into a glass ceiling or a barrier to advancement because of these skill sets. Like as you go up, sort of the corporate chain, you start running into, well, you're going to have to go do more presentations. You're going to be more engaged in senior meetings. You're going to have to be communicating what your business unit is doing, right? You become less of a technical specialist, and you start becoming more of a manager and a leader. And as you go up through that process, you actually need stronger communication skills, right? And so literacy fits into that. So businesses should be investing in this. That's number one. Number two is that a lot of small and medium-sized businesses will push back, no, we don't have money for this. We don't actually have a budget. My experience talking to an awful lot of individuals, a lot of newcomers in particular, is that they actually would like to go do language and skills training, but it is hard to balance work and life. So in many cases, I think all businesses need to do is be more flexible, right? Telling a worker that you'll actually give them an hour, that they can, take an hour off in the afternoon to go off and do the course and then come back and make up the time later. You may find an awful lot of workers actually will sign up for that. Right? It doesn't have to be financial support. It could just be actually giving workers the flexibility to take advantage of some of the programs. It would be great if the private sector could partner with organizations that do this sort of skills training, and TD does. We have a variety of different programs. We have something that's, we have an English and French, what we call English Cafe. And we encourage workers to come, and we have some language trainers there, and it's basically a very informal setting to allow people to practice their language skills with people that can help them develop their skill set. And it's very much encouraged. And that's something you need. You need business leaders to champion this issue, because it does filter down, right? I mean, I can keep going. There's an enormous number of things the private sector can do to help foster this. The biggest problem is getting the awareness that they understand that there is an enormous payoff from investment in this area.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Craig, and thanks for a wonderful presentation. You've certainly shown, as we know, that literacy is linked to economic recovery and health and poverty reduction and social change. And I'm wondering your presentation along with Dr. Rick Miner's last night, I keep wondering, what is it that we as the literacy field, what more research, what more reason do we need to present to get the investment that we believe is committed by government, but to actually have it happen? And I'm kind of both encouraged and flabbergasted, because it seems like we have very good economic sound reasons to invest in literacy, and yet it's not happening. So what else do we need to be doing?
I've got an answer. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how I want to formulate it, because it's somewhat contentious. I'm going to give you an experience I recently had, or an experience I had some time ago, where, basically I was having a conversation with our CEO, and I said, you know what needs to happen? We're having a problem with productivity in this country. We desperately need to have an enormous effort to improve productivity. And I know the public doesn't buy into this. Like, I know the public has a very bad image of productivity. And I said to our CEO, you know what, the government needs to do what it did in the 1990s. When the government was running an enormous fiscal deficit, it sold the public on the importance of this issue, that it was critical that Canada put its fiscal house in order, and the government showed enormous leadership in this area, and they convinced Canadians that this was important to do. Now, you've all had this experience. You say something to someone and their face falls, right? You now know you've said either A, something monumentally stupid, right? Or B, you've said something the person vehemently disagrees with. And that's what happened. And when it's the CEO of your company, your stomach falls, right? So I remember this really, really well, right? And he looked at me and he said, you have it all wrong. That isn't what happened in the 1990s. What happened in the 1990s was the Wall Street Journal ran a story that said the Canadian dollar was the peso of the North. And there was an outcry about how embarrassing this was, and the fact that the government was running, unacceptably large deficits. And the general perception was that the government was mismanaging the finances of the country, and there was a public outcry about it. And because it became there was a groundswell of, we have to do something about this, government embraced that and then made it a priority, and Canada did something no one would have ever imagined possible and got back to a balanced budget in a remarkably good time frame, right? I think the point here is that, in some cases, politicians lead, but in most cases, they follow. You have to have basically an issue poll relatively high to get a lot of progress on it. And the problem is that literacy does not poll high with Canadians. Right? The same thing happened with climate change. Right? The Canadian government, after signing on Kyoto, did next to nothing. We didn't actually have much progress. We had changes of government. Nothing seemed to happen. And then all of a sudden, one day, the environment started polling higher than healthcare. And there was an enormous effort to do something. Right? I think the lesson here is that you can lobby government to do more, and you can try to sell government on the importance of an issue. But ultimately, if you really want money to be invested in the area, you desperately have to have the public behind you. Now, this then leads to the next question, like, how do you do that? And I got to be honest, I don't have a good answer to this one, right? But I think the bulk of the lobbying that goes on for greater investment in literacy is targeted at politicians or the bureaucracy, and I think not enough is done in terms of lobbying the general public that this is a core problem. And you need something to actually stir people up and get them to be more aware of it. As I said, I've gotten so discouraged. My solution is to tie it to, oh, you care about healthcare. Well, this relates to that. This can fit under that mandate. Oh, you're concerned about newcomers. Okay, this fits under that mandate. You're concerned about poverty. Okay, this can help you here too. And I think that tends to be the most effective because those issues like that are polling relatively high, and that gives you better scope to make progress.